Have you ever told like a little white lie and it just completely spiraled out of control?
Yeah.
Yeah, what if that lie like got you entangled with a king
Oh, wow.
and like jeopardized a divine covenant?
That's a big lie.
So buckle up, because
Mhm.
today we're diving deep into Genesis chapter 20. This is where Abraham's fibbing leads to some pretty serious consequences.
Oh, yeah. This chapter is a wild ride. It's just fascinating how this seemingly small deception, it just sets off this chain of events that really could have derailed God's plan for all of humanity. It's crazy.
Okay, so let's break this down verse by verse.
Okay.
Right. Starting in verse 1, we find Abraham and Sarah, they're pitching their tents in Gerar.
Right.
And this is a land that's ruled by King Abimelech.
Yes.
And here's where Abraham's old habit, it pops up again.
Uh-oh.
He introduces Sarah as his sister, not his wife.
Right. It's like a bad sequel.
Totally.
Because we've seen this play out before.
Oh, yeah.
Back in Genesis 12.
Totally, yeah.
And it makes you wonder, like, what was going on in Abraham's head?
I know.
Was it just fear, self-preservation, or something else entirely?
Yeah, I mean, and this is where it gets interesting, because some skeptics, they might point to this repeated deception, right?
Right.
As evidence that the Bible is just myths.
Right.
The source material that we're looking at brings up a good counterpoint to this.
Okay.
It mentions that archaeologists have uncovered evidence of Gerar.
Wow.
And they've even found inscriptions that mention a King Abimelech.
That's a crucial detail.
It is.
It really grounds this story in historical reality.
It does.
And it suggests that these weren't just made-up characters,
Yeah.
but real people grappling with real dilemmas.
Totally. All right, so moving on to verses 2 and 3. Abimelech, well, he's smitten with Sarah.
Understandably.
He takes her into his household.
Okay.
But before anything happens, God enters the scene
Oh, boy.
in a very dramatic fashion.
Here we go.
He appears to Abimelech in a dream and delivers a very stark warning.
This isn't just a gentle nudge from God. This is like a full-blown intervention.
Oh, yeah.
God tells Abimelech that he is essentially a dead man,
Wow.
taking another man's wife.
Yeah.
And it really underscores the gravity of the situation.
Oh, yeah.
And God's just unwavering commitment to protecting Sarah and the covenant that he made with Abraham.
Right. So Abimelech, he wakes up terrified.
Yeah.
Understandably.
Yeah.
In verse 4, he pleads his case to God.
Okay.
He insists that he had no idea Sarah was married.
Right.
He even points out that Abraham and Sarah, they presented themselves as siblings.
Right.
And this is where we see God's justice, but also tempered with mercy.
Yeah.
He acknowledges Abimelech's innocence.
He did.
And he knew that Abimelech's heart was pure
Wow.
and that he actually prevented him from sinning.
That's amazing.
Really speaks volumes about God's character, I think.
It does.
He judges righteously,
Yeah.
but also extends grace to those who are genuinely unaware of their wrongdoing.
Yeah, that's powerful.
Now, verse 6 is particularly insightful, I think. God tells Abimelech, I also withheld you from sinning against me. Therefore, I did not let you touch her.
Wow.
So this suggests that God actively intervenes in our lives, like sometimes preventing us from making choices that would have devastating consequences.
It's a profound thought.
It is.
It makes you wonder about, free will
Right.
and divine sovereignty. Do we always have complete control over our actions?
Right.
Or does God sometimes guide us away from paths that would lead us astray?
It makes you wonder.
Yeah.
So God instructs Abimelech to return Sarah to Abraham because, as verse 7 reveals, Abraham's a prophet.
And this is significant because it's actually the first time the word prophet is used in the Bible.
Wow.
And God tells Abimelech that Abraham will pray for him and he'll be healed.
Wow.
So this highlights the unique role that prophets play, right?
Yeah.
In interceding for others
Mm-hmm.
and the power of prayer to bring about healing and restoration.
So Abimelech, he's fearing for his life, right?
Mhm.
And his kingdom. He wastes no time.
Smart.
In verse 8, he immediately calls his servants together. He recounts the dream and God's warning.
Okay.
It's clear that God's message has really shaken him.
Absolutely. The text says that the men were sore afraid.
Wow.
There's this palpable sense of awe and reverence for the power of the divine.
But Abimelech isn't just going to let this slide.
Oh, no.
No, in verse 9, he confronts Abraham.
He does.
He demands an explanation for this deception.
Yeah.
And he accuses Abraham of putting him and his entire kingdom at risk.
Wow.
By his actions.
And this is where the irony kicks in, I think.
It does.
A pagan king is holding this patriarch of faith accountable for his dishonesty.
Right.
It challenges our assumptions about who holds the moral high ground.
Yeah.
And it highlights the universality of certain ethical principles.
Right.
That go beyond just, cultural or religious boundaries.
So how does Abraham respond to this confrontation?
Good question.
Well, in verses 11 and 12, he tries to justify his actions.
Okay.
He claims that he feared for his life, and he didn't believe that anyone in Gerar feared God.
Okay.
And he also points out that Sarah is technically his half-sister.
Right.
Which, while technically true, doesn't really excuse the deception.
It's a weak excuse.
It is.
And I think even Abraham knows it. He's grasping at straws, trying to rationalize his behavior.
Totally.
But the fact that he even feels the need to justify himself to this pagan king suggests that he recognizes on some level that he's violated some fundamental moral code.
Yeah.
Even one that transcends cultural boundaries.
Totally. Now, Abimelech, wanting to make amends, goes above and beyond to try to rectify the situation.
Okay.
In verses 14 to 16, he returns Sarah to Abraham.
He does.
And he showers him with gifts, sheep, oxen, servants, and even offers him land.
Wow, that's a lot.
It's a lot.
That's very generous.
It is.
This is in stark contrast to Abraham's earlier actions, right?
It is.
Abimelech is displaying remarkable generosity.
He is.
And a genuine desire to restore justice.
Right.
It's an act of reconciliation that speaks volumes about his character.
And he even gives Sarah 1,000 pieces of silver.
Wow.
As a public declaration of her innocence.
Okay.
And a form of restitution.
That's big.
It's a powerful act of restoring her honor and acknowledging the wrong that was done to her.
Yeah. And this act of generosity really challenges the common misconception that the Old Testament portrays all non-Israelites as inherently evil.
It does.
Abimelech's actions show that righteousness and compassion aren't confined to any particular group.
Totally. And the story doesn't end there.
It doesn't.
In verse 17, we encounter this remarkable act of grace.
Okay.
Abraham prays for Abimelech.
He does.
And God responds to that prayer in a powerful way. He heals Abimelech, his wife, and all the women in his household who had been unable to conceive.
Wow, that's amazing.
It's a demonstration of God's power and mercy, extending even to those who don't follow him.
Absolutely. And this brings us back to God's unwavering protection of his covenant.
It does.
It's implied that God had closed the wombs of the women in Abimelech's household to prevent any confusion over the lineage of the promised child.
Yes.
Isaac.
Right.
Who would be born to Sarah and Abraham.
Right.
Exactly. And the fact that God restores their fertility after Sarah is safely back with Abraham demonstrates his sovereignty over all things.
Yes.
Even the smallest details of human life.
So we've covered a lot of ground here. Deception, divine intervention, confrontation, and ultimately restoration and healing.
We have.
Genesis chapter 20 is a whirlwind of a chapter.
It is.
Packed with theological insights. But before we move on, I want to pause and reflect on what we've learned so far. What stands out to you in this account of Abraham, Abimelech, and Sarah?
Well, what really strikes me is the juxtaposition of Abraham and Abimelech. You have this, patriarch of faith who's resorting to deception, and then you have this pagan king acting with integrity and generosity.
Right.
It really challenges our preconceived notions of good and evil.
It definitely makes you think about those labels, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
It's a reminder that the line between good and bad isn't always so clear-cut.
Right.
We all have the capacity for both.
We do.
And God can work through anyone, regardless of their background or beliefs.
Exactly. And that's actually one of the things that makes the Bible so compelling, I think.
Yeah?
It doesn't shy away from portraying its heroes with all their flaws and complexities.
Right.
It's a testament to the authenticity and honesty of the biblical narrative.
It's like those reality shows where everything is perfectly staged and edited.
Right.
It just doesn't feel real.
It doesn't.
The Bible, on the other hand, gives us these raw, unfiltered stories of human struggles and triumphs.
Right.
It's relatable, even thousands of years later.
Absolutely. And this chapter in particular highlights that even those who are chosen by God are still human.
Right.
They make mistakes.
They do.
They experience fear. And they sometimes stray from, the path of righteousness.
Yeah, it's kind of comforting in a way.
Yeah.
To know that even Abraham, the father of our faith, had his moments of weakness.
I agree.
It makes me feel less alone in my own struggles.
It definitely humanizes these biblical figures.
It does.
And makes their stories more accessible to us.
Yeah.
We can see ourselves in their struggles.
Right.
And learn from their mistakes.
Absolutely. Speaking of learning, what are some of the key takeaways from Genesis chapter 20
Oh, good question.
that we can apply to our own lives today?
Well, I think one of the most important lessons is the importance of honesty.
Yeah.
As we saw with Abraham, his attempts to deceive others ultimately backfired,
Yeah.
created more problems than they solved.
They did?
It's a reminder that integrity is essential, even when it's difficult.
Yeah. It's like that saying, honesty is the best policy.
Right.
It may not always be easy, but it's always the right choice in the long run.
Exactly. And it's not just about avoiding negative consequences.
Right.
Honesty is also about building trust.
Yeah.
And fostering healthy relationships with others.
Mm-hmm.
When we're truthful with people, we earn their respect.
Right.
And we create a foundation for genuine connection.
Another takeaway that resonates with me is the power of prayer.
Yeah.
We saw how Abraham's prayer for Abimelech led to healing and restoration
It did.
for him and his entire household.
Yes.
It's an encouragement to bring our concerns, both big and small, to God,
It is.
trusting that he hears us and cares about our needs.
And it's not just about petitioning God for our own needs.
Right.
Prayer is also about aligning our hearts with God's will,
Yes.
seeking his guidance, and interceding for others.
Right.
It's a way of staying connected to the source of our strength
Mm.
and allowing his grace to flow through us.
This chapter also reminded me that our actions have consequences, not just for ourselves, but for those around us.
They do.
Abraham's choices put Abimelech and his entire kingdom at risk.
Yes.
It highlights the interconnectedness of our lives and the responsibility we have to act with wisdom
Right.
and consideration for others.
It's like that butterfly effect idea
Yeah.
where even small actions can have ripple effects that we may not even be aware of.
Right.
It's a reminder to be mindful of the choices we make
Right.
and the potential impact they can have on those around us.
This whole episode with Abimelech really makes you wonder about the nature of faith, doesn't it?
It does.
Here's a man who doesn't even believe in the same God as Abraham,
Right.
yet he acts with more integrity and righteousness.
He does.
It challenges our assumptions about what it means to be a person of faith.
It's a great point. It suggests that faith isn't just about adhering to a set of doctrines or rituals.
Right.
It's about living a life that reflects the character of God, a life marked by love, compassion, justice, and mercy.
Yeah.
And those qualities can be found in people from all walks of life,
Right.
regardless of their religious beliefs.
So Genesis chapter 20 is more than just a historical account.
It is.
It's a profound exploration of human nature,
Right.
divine intervention,
Yes.
and the complexities of faith.
Absolutely.
It's a story that continues to speak to us today,
It does.
challenging us to examine our own hearts
Right.
and strive to live lives of integrity, honesty, and compassion.
It's a powerful story.
So as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I'm curious, what are your thoughts on the significance of the closed wombs in Abimelech's household?
Oh, that's interesting.
It's a detail that often gets overlooked,
It does.
but I think it holds some important theological implications.
Yeah, the closed wombs are often seen as a sign of God's judgment, right?
Mm-hmm.
But also his protection. He was ensuring that there would be no ambiguity surrounding the lineage of Isaac, the promised child.
It's almost like God was putting things on pause
Right.
until Sarah was back in her rightful place.
Exactly. He was safeguarding the fulfillment of his covenant with Abraham
Right.
and ensuring that that line of inheritance would be clear.
And then once Sarah is returned and Abraham prays for Abimelech,
Yeah.
God reopens the wombs.
He does.
It's this beautiful picture of God's mercy and restoration.
Yeah, like a reset button. God removes that obstacle he had put in place.
Yeah.
And blesses Abimelech's household with the gift of children.
Yeah, it's powerful.
It really is. It's a powerful demonstration of his power and his willingness to forgive and restore.
This whole episode with Abimelech really makes you think about prayer, doesn't it?
It does.
I mean, Abraham prays for a man who doesn't even share his faith.
Right.
And God answers that prayer. It speaks to the universality of God's love
It does.
and the power of intercessory prayer.
It's a reminder that prayer isn't just about asking for things for ourselves, you know?
Yeah.
It's about aligning our hearts with God's will and seeking his blessings for others,
Yeah.
even those who may be different from us.
It also highlights the importance of forgiveness, I think.
Yeah.
Abraham could have held a grudge against Abimelech for taking Sarah.
Right.
But he doesn't. He chooses to pray for him.
Yeah, and that's huge.
It is.
It's a powerful example of how forgiveness can break down barriers.
Right.
And open the door to reconciliation.
Yeah. It's a beautiful illustration of the transformative power of grace.
It is.
Both God's grace toward us and the grace that we extend to others.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Genesis chapter 20, what are some final thoughts
Oh, that's a good question.
that you'd like to leave our listeners with? What are the big takeaways that we can carry with us from this story?
Well, I think one of the key takeaways is that God is always at work, right? Even in the midst of our mistakes and failures.
Yeah.
He's sovereign over all things.
He is.
And he uses even our missteps to accomplish his purposes.
It's like that saying, God writes straight with crooked lines.
Yes.
He can take our messy human lives and weave them into his grand tapestry.
Exactly. Exactly. And another important takeaway, I think, is the importance of trusting in God's promises, right?
Right.
Abraham and Sarah faced so many challenges and uncertainties, but they never lost sight of God's promise to them.
Yeah.
And in the end, God was faithful to fulfill his word.
He was.
It's a reminder that we can hold on to God's promises even when we don't see how they could possibly come true.
Right.
He is always working behind the scenes, and he will never let us down.
And finally, I think this chapter really challenges us to live lives of integrity,
Yes.
honesty, and compassion, just like Abimelech. We're called to act with righteousness, even when it's hard,
Yes, it is.
and to extend grace and forgiveness to those who've wronged us.
Yeah, I love that.
It's a tall order, but it's a calling worth pursuing, I think.
I think so, too.
It's how we reflect the character of God
Hey.
and make his love visible in the world.
It's been such a great journey exploring Genesis chapter 20 with you.
It has.
If you want to see this chapter, brought to life visually,
Yes.
check out our YouTube channel, Make Heaven Crowded.
Yes.
We've got stunning visuals and insightful commentary that'll really deepen your understanding of this amazing story.
It will. And be sure to share this episode with your friends and leave your thoughts and questions in the comments. We love hearing from you.
We do.
Thanks for joining us on the Make Heaven Crowded podcast. Until next time, keep seeking, keep questioning, and keep making heaven crowded.